You're listening to theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
This extended show is sponsored by backpackinglight.co.uk.
First of all,
minimum.
Maximum fun.
Backpackinglight.co.uk.
The UK's first outdoor podcasting show.
Regular listeners will remember that in February of this year, I spoke with Judy Armstrong just before she set out on her solo, lightweight, long-distance Alpine challenge. It was an ambitious trip, which came about following the death of two close friends from cancer, and she set her heart on trailblazing a circular route using the Via Alpina of some 3,300 miles, and to be the first person to complete the task. But her commitment to it went further, much further than most of us would possibly contemplate. Judy sold her house, her car, her worldly possessions to support herself, so that every penny she raised would go to cancer research. Well, after 10 months, she's back from the Mercanteur, Akron and Keras National Parks, where, after a slight change of plan, she has walked for 275 days, covering 4,000 mountain miles, 450 miles of which were spent snowshoeing and climbing more than 1 million feet. And she was carrying just a 5k load, much to the astonishment of other hikers she met en route. So, are you impressed yet? Sadly, we have just so much time in these podcasts, so we only managed to dip into some of her many adventures of this trip. Perhaps this will give you a taster of her incredible determination.
Well, to start off with, the route turned out to be very poorly signposted. I have been warned of this, but it caught me unawares. And really, I think I'm going to be using 1 in 25k maps for much of a challenging future. Another big issue was that we had a big wave of snow come through, a good foot of snow, which changed the conditions I was expecting. And it was very cold as well. I slept once at minus 16.
Okay, so that was a quick introduction into it. The snow came. Did the snow come literally as you started, or did it slowly build up on you? Did it, I remember speaking to you. I think you were going like the day or the day after the last time we spoke.
I was, yes. The snow came through in a band and hit mainly the Italian side. I thought I was being clever, planning to come through the Italian side in the spring. But, well, there you go, plans change. And literally we had a foot overnight at 1,100 meters, and it turned into close to 2 feet at 2,500 meters. And 2 feet at that height is getting a bit avalanchy, so it was very tricky.
Well, first of all, I must suggest people, if they've not heard the full story, have a listen to your previous interview of you about to set off, which can be found on the Outdoor Station website. And this is obviously the part 2, as it were, the return. Now, you say you were actually on your own, weren't you?
Yes, entirely. I walked briefly with 1 or 2 friends during the year, but otherwise I spent the whole year trotting around, communing with animals and talking with things.
Careful now.
Sounds a bit strange, doesn't it?
The problem you had then was weather and mapping, and I saw a note on your blog that you decided to change your ambition and adapt it. So just explain how it changed, if you would.
I realized at one point that one of the key qualities missing was courage. I'd previously walked up to 600 miles, and 600 miles, you can eat into it a bit with a single long day. You can do sort of 30 miles, and then it's only 570 miles, and you can see that you're going to get it done. 4,000 miles, I just couldn't see the end, couldn't get my head around it at all. Now, of course, I've done that far. I know that 3,200 miles, if not a blast in the park, I'm confident I can get around it.
Do you think part of that mental sort of adjustment that you had to make, was that because you'd come from London and a busy life, and you were busy selling your house, and you were clearing all your sort of details to get on with this particular trek, that by the time you actually got there and sort of started to get into it, your mind was still active and still racing, and you saw sort of 4,000 miles as a series of conquests. You've got to do this, and this, as one do a sort of a working day.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Also, I think at that point the challenge was, it felt a little bit like, what was a mythical beast with millions of snakes sticking out of its head, and you cut off one snake and another one grows. I felt that the year was just going to be a series of obstacles and difficulties, starting primarily with navigation. And I just didn't have the courage for it, Bob. I felt at the end of the day that I'd come to enjoy the mountains, to push myself as hard as I could, and see how far I got. And I was reluctant to set off a quarter of the way through and then find there was a big issue. Because, of course, if you do 1,000 miles on a route, you're less likely to come back to it and do that 1,000 miles again, planning to do the whole route. I want to keep the whole route virgin, ready to do it, which I will do shortly.
Okay, so we're going to come back and do the whole route in itself. Great. I'm quite interested. I mean, we've only got a certain amount of time really to talk, and I think a lot of people will be listening to this, getting their head, putting themselves in your situation and getting their head round of where they are in their lives at the moment and thinking, okay, well, if I started tomorrow to do a 4,000-mile route, 1,000,000 feet of climbing, 4,000 mountain miles, it's some task. The biggest part, I think, for most people I've talked to that have done reasonable distance routes of this sort of nature is that it takes the first 3 or 4 weeks for them to physically acclimatise, but also mentally acclimatise to how they're working, how they're feeling, how their equipment is working, and so on. We'll come on to equipment in a minute, but I'm more interested in this. You're obviously very aware of how you changed during this trip. If you could possibly just sort of explain it in your own words, the changes that came over you.
The changes really surprised me a little bit. I think if you come from a city environment, there's always, especially if you're a woman, you tend to think about all the things you should be doing. You're walking along thinking, must do this, must get this, must write that, don't forget. And there's a sort of vast post-its stuck all over your brain. And that seems to take quite a while to vanish. And eventually, I just existed, didn't really think or talk to myself at all. And I just seemed to vanish almost into the landscape. Strange. And it does sound slightly as though I'm a psychiatric case. Possibly I am. What surprised me in particular was that there were times when I saw wild animals, deer, chamois, ptarmigans, and even eagles, and they didn't seem to be frightened of me, which was peculiar. I noticed it more and more throughout the year. There was a time when I got within 2 feet of a chamois, and you just never normally do that. They're usually very fey, and they hiss at you and run off. So I'm not sure what I sensed, but something's changed.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the confidence and the awareness and perhaps the what's the word I'm looking for? The ability to become part of the environment, and as opposed to a quick visitor. The body language that you must be giving off must be completely different, I would think. I
guess it must be that. Yeah. Yeah. Plus the dirt and the smell, possibly.
I can't imagine that for a minute, Judy. I can't imagine that. I've read some notes here that you sent through to me, and just to remind people that you didn't suddenly do this out of a whim. You'd actually done a fair amount of preparation in London, and certainly done a lot of. I think you were doing running as well as long walks, weren't you?
Yes, I had. I think about a 6-month build-up with weights and running and cycling and walking and things. A little problem, of course, which is that. Garfield Pike's quite some way from London. There's not really any hills here other than the office stairs, so I was a bit short on that.
So let's talk about some of the highlights and some of the adventures you had. You just mentioning before I pressed record there about finding a mountain hut, sort of quite deep in snow, and the door being frozen and having to sleep somewhat chilly.
Yes, this was a fairly rude introduction to snow camping. I'd not really done any serious stuff before. I set off with everything I needed essentially for summer camping, which I was pretty confident in, down to about -6, -8, wearing all my clothes. A sleeping quilt that weighed about 600 grams, just over a pound. So quite lightweight, but I used it to -5. The snow came in deeply, and I think it must have been a cold front, because I got up to 2,500 meters, one of the refuges, and it was easily -10. I cut away the snow from the door.
Just describe how deep the snow was for people, if you would.
On that side of the refuge, it had worked its way up to roof level, so it was, I suppose, 9-10 feet deep, hard to say. But I shoveled and cut all the snow away. It took me an hour and a half, only to find that the door to the winter quarters was set into a steel frame, and it had ice closed. And I used my ice axe and couldn't shift it. So it was dark then and snowing and cold, and I didn't feel as though I could sensibly, it's difficult travelling on snow after dark with a head torch. You really don't get much definition. So I thought I'd just stay put and camp, which I duly did. Sleeping, though, didn't really happen. It was minus 16 at night, and I got frostnip in 2-3 of my toes.
Wow.
Destroyed the nails there.
So did you sort of bunk down by the doorway to the shelter, or did you move away from there?
I put up my tent and the full sleeping system just in the lee of the shelter, but it was just plain cold. There wasn't any getting away from it, and sat there shivering all night. It's silly. Now I think I'd probably go down to the valley.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, so the following day, what did you do? Head down to the valley, or
Yes,
continue
yes,
on?
but I wasn't confident at that point of being able to detect avalanche slopes after dark on a head torch. Now I think I probably could.
Right. Okay. So this awareness has slowly grown on over the period of time. Then
it's changed hugely, and in fact, my whole navigation has changed hugely. I tend to look much more at the mountains and just where the paths are. It's not too hard to work it out.
Well, I remember one of the impressions again you left me with when we last spoke on and off the record, as it were, was how much you were researching other people's adventures and trips and so on all over the world. Whether it be on the internet or podcasts or whatever it might be, to glean any last-minute piece of information. And what's definitely coming across now is there's this air of confidence that you really do feel like you now fit in that environment and you can handle a lot more than you were perhaps nervous about before you started.
Exactly. In early November, we had warning of a big storm coming through with 90-mile-an-hour winds at altitude. And I thought, that would be fun. Let's go and climb Mont Gibboni. So I went off and did that, which was interesting. An interesting experience. Didn't put me off, and it was fine.
And now, let's talk about a few of your adventures. That was the Chile one. Have you had a few really nice days and glorious springtime weather and fantastic sunshine and diving into mountain streams?
Well, the spring was superb in the Hautes-Alpes, which is the area, I suppose, about halfway between Nice and Lake Geneva. You have a funny mixing between the lovely light of Provence and, of course, the mountains as well. So often the light is absolutely magnificent. If you want to go and do some photography, that's the place. There were times when I just stopped and tears literally came to my eyes. Just the beauty of the landscape. Just so remarkable.
Well, we must also remind people where your website is, so they can actually have a look at that while they're listening to this. So could you just give us the details, because I know you've got lots of photographs on there.
Yeah, I have. I'm afraid. It's www.alpinechallenge. That's all one word. .info, and there's photographs and gear reports and lots of information about walking in the Alps and reviews, a whole series of gear reviews that I put on at the end of this walk, exactly how everything worked out in 4,000 miles.
And what was it like when you met other people? Because presumably as the year progressed and obviously spring, summer came round, you were meeting more people on the hills. Were they surprised to see a lone woman and also somebody carrying such a lightweight sort of outfit?
Yes, exactly. At one point I walked the GR54, which is the Tour des Écrins. It's a magnificent walk. If anybody has a couple of weeks spare, I really recommend it. It's beautiful. And I think it's within the capability of any competent hill walker. I met a group of school children doing it in their teens, for example. But staying sometimes in the gîtes, people would say, you're day walking? Looking at my backpack. And I said, no, I'm walking the Tour des Écrins. And they'd sort of look at me and look at their pack, which was 2 or 3 times the size. And I'd say, well, I've got everything I need there. And they'd say, but you haven't got a tent, have you? I'd say, yes. Sleeping bag? Yes. At this point, there'd be a little crowd around me, and I said, shall I show you things? So I'd sort of pull things out and say, well, there's my sleeping bag, and they'd sort of look at it in disgust and say, but it's so light. And then I'd pull out my tent, and they'd say, well, that's not a tent, it's a bivy bag. And it would sort of go on, and eventually people would just start scratching their heads and saying, "C'est pas vrai, mais qu'est-ce qu'elle fait?" and the likes. And you get to the bottom of a 30-litre backpack, and they sort of look at the backpack and look at everything that come out of it, rather like a TARDIS, bigger inside than out. And what I really wanted, I think, was a white rabbit to sort of pull out like a magician saying, "And there we are."
and a set of trumpets. Ta-da!
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I hope I've got a few lightweight converts there, Bob. I've even told them about backpackinglight.co.uk, so there we are.
Bless your cotton socks. I mean, just curiosity. I mean, you've been aware and followed very closely the changes in the UK in the last year, 2 years really, where the sort of influence of lightweight is started to take hold now. From the people you were meeting in the area, French presumably mostly, were they aware of a change of ethos behind equipment and people using it, or not at all?
A few of them were. I hooked up with a couple of people who were going fast and carrying lightweight specialized packs. They had quite a bit of gear from Raid Light. I noticed you got some of that on your site, and they talked highly of it. Things like the Raid Light Gators, for example, which I know you like. They liked as well. So there are some, but it's something of an elite. And many of the people I was walking with just had ordinary gear and were carrying 15, 18 kilos per person, which is silly. It's silly. I mean, why? Why would you carry a boat anchor on your back when you don't need to?
Well, once you've actually dropped those sort of 5 or 10 kilos, you do wonder what on earth you saw, what was attractive about it in the first place, don't you?
Yeah, there's absolutely no way. In fact, there's no way I'll go back to the gear I had before, so much so that I'm going to jumble it.
Really? Gosh. Wow. The house is gone, and now all the old gear's gone as well.
Well, exactly. Yep, it's going.
Talking of equipment, let's sort of skip through a few things here. I'd like to just ask you how things performed, and if you've got any examples of how you used it, just so that people could visualise better, shall we say? Then do tell us. Now, I remember that you were saying that you were going to make a copy of the fly sheet of the Hilleberg Acto, but I noticed in the end you actually took the Acto fly sheet.
Yeah, playing safe. I made the fly sheet, and it's significantly lighter, but it also tends to flap a little bit because the fabric is so light. Really, at the end of the day, all it's given me is respect for Hilleberg's build quality. And given that shelter tends to be light, I decided to just go with the Hilleberg. It's not actually that much heavier in any case.
But you actually obviously disposed of the inner and used the Bozeman breathing bivy bag shelter, which I've seen, which is very light, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated. I'm not going to claim credit for it. I think other people have done similar things in the States. In fact, I suspect strongly I cribbed it from backpackinglight.com, Ryan Jordan and co. The essence of it is that you use a lightweight porous bivvy. This is not one that you can put outside because the rain will come in. And you put that underneath a fly sheet. The porous bivvy keeps you warm, lets the damp out if there is any damp, and keeps any spindrift and spray and muck from coming onto you. Why bother? Well, firstly, I don't have the exact figures, but from memory, the porous bivvy is something like a third of the weight of a Hilleberg inner. So big weight saving and big volume saving too. It's much, much smaller. You can easily pack the Bozeman bivvy inside a typical 700 mil saucepan, for example. It's tiny. Underneath that, I used a down quilt, not a sleeping bag. This is a thing that goes over the top of you. And I sized it and got the amount of down, bearing in mind that I would have a down jacket and other clothes. So the intent was always that when it got cold, I'd wear everything I had. And to keep my down quilt functional, clean, and to avoid it clumping up with moisture that freezes when it gets cold, I used a vapor barrier liner. From my point of view, if you can cope with the slight clamminess that a VBL produces, it's essentially just a big plastic bag, only it's slightly more comfortable than a dustbin liner. The key advantage is that it stops you transpiring or perspiring at night time, and you feel much warmer. Slight extra advantage is that you need to drink less as well. Traditionally, VBLs have really only been used in cold weather on mountains, but I think they have some applicability throughout the year. I use mine in winter, in spring, in autumn, and when winter started again.
So the VBL then is a
Yeah.
separate item to the Bozeman bivy bag itself. I thought it was the same thing.
Exactly. If you count out from my body, first of all I wear, when it's really cold, all my clothes. Then I climb inside a big plastic bag called a vapor barrier liner. Then on top of that goes the down sleeping quilt. Underneath I put an Evazote foam pad, which I think has the best insulation, doubled sometimes, for winter use. And the whole lot goes inside the Bozeman bivy bag. And then, of course, the Acto outer goes on the outside.
Right, and so a bit of a wriggle, I should imagine, to
It's a
get
bit of a wriggle.
to get
and
in there. Yeah.
if nature calls in the night, it's a pain. But apart from that, you can devise a sleeping system that will keep you going much less weight than conventionally with, say, a sleeping bag and all the rest of the shebang.
And how long did it take you to get used to sleeping like that and sleeping comfortably?
There were a few little tricks I learned to do with which bits of clothing to keep on. You keep socks on, for example, but don't put boots on because it tends to put holes in the plastic bags. Mm. How long did it take me to get comfortable? I think probably about a week or so. I didn't find it that hard. Usually, because I tend to walk hard and long, I'm so tired at night time, I'll sleep anywhere.
Well, that's the fresh air and the exercise does tend to help from that point of view. And what were you using for a pillow? Were you using a pillow or any sort of head covering?
Don't use a pillow. For head covering, I used a Primaloft hat, and if it was really cold, I put on another hat inside that.
And did you the mat? Was it a full length mat, or was it just your torso? And then did you put your feet on top of the rucksack or something?
I cut it down and put my feet on top of the remains of the rucksack, which didn't really have much in it. Mm. And when I doubled it up, the doubling was just underneath the torso.
Okay, well, so just talking about that sleeping system for a moment then, when did you find that it didn't perform as well as you had expected? What was the worst case situation, whether it's moisture or weather generally, that caused it to be the dampest or the most uncomfortable?
The most uncomfortable was when I had a warm night and wasn't expecting it, when simply I misjudged it, woke up in the middle of the night to find I was just plain too hot and had to take clothes off. Because you have a nice little fug building up inside a vapor barrier liner. So when you come out of it, the fug will evaporate and you cool off fast. So that's awkward. You have to learn to judge how much clothing to wear to suit the conditions you expect at night. And of course, as with any sleeping system, it has its limits. You can get too cold when the weather's too cold.
And you slept directly on snow at times with this system?
Yes, yeah. In fact, I didn't really keep statistics. I would think about 25, 30 days I slept on snow. It works very well on snow, there's no problem at all. Mm. The advantage of the VBL is that any spin drift that comes in with a strong wind doesn't get anywhere near you or your sleeping bag.
Well, of course, the other advantage being with not using the Acto inner, it's actually quite a space in there, isn't there, to actually sort the rest of the gear out and do some cooking. Yeah. Now, and talking of cooking, you used a meth system, didn't you?
Yes, the Caldera cone. Good fun. Works well. Bit of a nuisance setting it up. This long, stringy piece of aluminium that tends to go boing and go straight when you least want it to. I usually wrapped it up in my sleeping roll. I found that was more reliable than trying to slide it into my backpack. It's, as I say, a bit of a fiddle, but I love it because you can use it in pretty much any weather. It's sturdy in that sense, like a Trangia. It can be used in almost any weather. I managed to light it in -14 one day, which I think is quite impressive for a meth stove. Also, there's absolutely zero chance of knocking it over unless you take a flying kick at it, because the pot stand is so sturdy. What I tended to do eventually was to judge the amount of meth that's necessary using, they supply a little plastic measure, and you eventually work out just how much meth to put in. Once the thing is lit, you can't turn it off and you can't simmer it. So if you get it wrong, you're going to find that you're going either to be spilling pasta or blowing on the top of the thing to stop it spilling. Yeah. Usually what I do is put enough meth in to bring it to the boil. Then when it goes out, I just stick a hat on top and let it just cook quietly on its own.
Yes.
And then just eat it directly from the pot. Don't try and take it out of the stand.
So yeah, you've got using the hat as a cosy system.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah. And I presume getting hold of meths was never a problem at all in the villages you passed through?
Absolutely no problem. It's called alcool à brûler, 80% meth. It's no problem at all. Find it anywhere.
Now, looking, I know the Mariposa was your pack of choice, and again, I think we discussed this before you left, and Andy was very approving that you were choosing that particular pack. It's a lovely pack. It always strikes me as a very tall, thin pack obviously it's got a very long neck on it. But the material is, well, if you compared it to a lot of rucksacks in retail shops these days, it obviously appears to be fairly insubstantial. But obviously it stood up to the treatment that you gave it for sort of 7-8 months.
Yeah, I've got it next to me, in fact, as we're sitting here, and there is no damage at all on the sill nylon. I used the Mariposa for over 1,000 miles. It is vulnerable, I think, to some things, brambles, rocks, scrambling, that sort of thing. But if you're careful with it, it's astonishing. I mean, it's much the same thickness and feel as a thick plastic carrier bag. You think, I don't think so, that's not ever going to work. It does work very well. You have a backpack with a rudimentary back system, carbon fibre poles, for £1, 450 grams, which is incredible.
Well, obviously that performed well, and with that material. Now, and talking about the materials generally, you were using, I noticed, some vaporize equipment, and some of the was there any other Montane equipment in there? The Montane Quickfire jacket, the event jacket. How did all the modern fabrics work? In your eyes, could you research this very, very thoroughly before you went?
Yeah, I was astonished. Well, first of all, I love the vaporize because I hate this word soft shell. I really don't know what it means, but to my mind, the advantage of a wrap vaporize is that it's got the felt liner, which just wicks any moisture away from your skin, and it's a Pertex outer, so there's nothing at all that prevents the moisture getting away from your skin, which is utterly key when you're working, say, in snow conditions, -10, -18, you can't afford to have moisture lying near your skin because it's so dangerous. And the rad looked after me perfectly in very low temperatures. I chose the jacket over the smock because it has a double-ended zip, and for girls that means that we can ventilate the front and still remain decent. I love the rab. It's really, really good. The hood, I found multi-adjustable. There's little what are they called? The cords on you can clamp it right down if you want.
The shock cords, yeah?
Yeah. It's the sort of equipment that if somebody loaned it to me, I would have gone to Venezuela to avoid giving it back. Really, really good. Likewise, I used a Montane Quickfire event jacket, and I have nothing but praise for it. Simply superb. It's the first time I've been able to climb fast in rain without getting hot and sticky. Works for me perfectly.
But you chose the Berghaus trousers now, presumably because it had the full-length zip.
Yes, I started off looking for event trousers. Couldn't really find any. And what I could find looked rather heavy. A friend had Berghaus packlights and spoke highly of them, so I looked at a pair. Again, it looks like terribly filmy and insubstantial fabric. But they've lasted 4,000 miles, Bob, which is fantastic. And these long double-ended zips are wonderful. You can put them on even with muddy boots. You don't actually even need to sit down to put them on. Just lean against a tree or something. And you can dial in just as much ventilation or protection as you want.
Well, I must admit, I've got a pair myself, and I think there's nothing to touch them at all.
They're expensive, but I wouldn't have anything else now.
No,
really good.
It's that long zip that makes all the difference, and be able to vent them as you walk. I couldn't agree more.
I don't think one needs event trousers. I tend to run hot, and I find that my legs are quite happy in something like packlight. They don't need event, whereas I do need event on my top.
What about your extremities, your hands and your head? You mentioned some of the headgear you had. What about gloves and so on?
I've previously used an excellent pair of Marmot, M-A-R-M-O-T, not Mammut, Gore-Tex skiing gloves, which are wonderful so long as you're staying in a gîte every night and can put them on a radiator to dry them out. The problem with that on a long walk is that they just get claggy and filthy and smelly, and they just don't work very well. the inside of the glove fills up with salt, and how do you wash it? How do you clean it? How do you dry it? So I thought I'd use the layering system for gloves, and what I used, and this worked for all conditions down to minus 20, 21, I think was the coldest I had, a pair of lightweight synthetic gloves, that is fingered gloves, as a first layer. Then on top of that I used Buffalo Pile Pertex mitts. And on top of that I bought, you know who from, backpackinglight.co.uk.
Who might that be?
What?
Who might that be?
Who might that be? A set of your excellent Trekmate pack-like gloves, which lasted the whole distance. So the deal was essentially that if it was a bit cold, I'd use gloves. If it was drizzly or grotty or colder, then I put the mitts on top or use the mitts. And if it was really chucking it or I was in snow, then I put the pack-light mitts on top of those. It worked very well indeed. And of course you can dry it out in a jiffy.
Again, just to clarify, if you would, part of me is visualizing you doing this virtually continuous walking, and then part of me is thinking that you were popping down and resting for a few days or whatever, or topping up with obviously supplies and so on. So how many continuous nights were you camping out, as it were, and how often did you stop for a rest day, and how many rest days did you have?
I walked for 275 days. These are days with full walks in. I walked for 2,550 hours, which is about 9-hour days on average, which hides some statistics. I was taking it gently in the summer because it was just hot and I didn't really feel like doing much. And I was pushing 10, 11-hour days constantly for the last 3 months. In all, there were some 24 days, I think, when I didn't walk, some of which include packing up, returning to the UK, coming out, resting, and some of which were days enforced due to injury. I would think that I had probably 6 days due to overtiredness where I thought it was best just to plain stop, and probably 10, 12 days due to injury.
And what injuries are we talking about here?
Well, some years ago I got into a car crash and banged my head around, and my balance has never been A1 since. So I tend to fall over occasionally. I mean, I'm not like a drunk, I hasten to add, except when I'm drunk. But my balance is not as good as other people's. So, oh gosh, what happened? Trying to think. I've had a cracked rib and a couple of bruised ribs. I banged my head 3 or 4 times. I've got a blood clot on my right eye that's clearing slowly from a head injury. I had a bad fall and broke off 3 bits of bone in my right shoulder, which is a bit stupid of me.
I mean, this is not during the walk you had these accidents?
Yeah,
oh, is it?
During the walk, yeah.
Well, how did that happen? Tell us more.
Well, I thought it would be fun to do some pole vaulting, Bob. Walking, it's you just put one foot in front of the other, and I just thought it'd be fun to do something different. I was really stupid. I'd gone up a steep, difficult, snowy mountain, and I got to the bottom, and I was thinking, did that, didn't we? Whew. Pride comes before a fall. I put my pole in front of my right foot and fell over it, not very elegantly, and landed on rocks. And big mess, cut open my left leg, blood everywhere. And I thought initially I'd broken my collarbone because of the pain. So I sat down, collected myself, let the shock wear off, ate some food, fixed the leg that was bleeding, and got back to the car. And because I'm a nice soul, I thought, we'd better go down to the valley here. And there was some lad, this was after dark, hitchhiking at the bus stop. I thought, let's pick him up, poor lad. He's not going to get down. So he sat in the car with me. And my driving was not great that day. Couldn't really turn corners and change gear. And he looked at me and he said, "Your leg is bleeding." I said, "Yes, I've fallen over." And then he said, "Your right arm is not working." And even I could see the humor at the time. And I let him out, and he sort of ran like a rabbit, obviously thinking, English, never, ever hitchhike with them. It was good. Made me laugh at any rate.
Yeah. So with some of these injuries then, did you actually call in or use the emergency services in some way?
Yes, I had 2 injuries, and because I was a little concerned about possible things that might happen afterwards, I called in just to register the fact that an accident had happened. I took out an insurance policy with Snowcard, who were very good. They gave me a very competitive quote. I was completely level with them and said that it was solo, that it was going to be for 10 months, it was going to be snowshoeing, 500 miles on snow, and I always think full disclosure is best with insurance brokers. I phoned them up and they took down all the details. I said, look, at the moment nothing's happened, but I might get rabies, so at least you know who I am. The first accident was when a dog flew out of a small cave next to the path. Big Pyrenean sheepdog bit me in the leg, knocked me over, and was coming back for more until I stabbed it in the chest with my walking pole. We then parted, not the best of friends, with my leg bleeding. I did the right thing, I think, which was to squeeze the wounds, but it was still quite some time till I got back down to the valley. I went to the accident emergency room at the local hospital, and they treated me. I think it would be handy if you spoke some French if you're planning to do this in France. And most of it was covered with my EHIC card. That's the thing that gives you reciprocal health care in most European countries. In France, as far as I can judge, 2/3 of your immediate costs are covered. It seems to be possible to get the balance reimbursed as well. But we're only talking 60, 80 euros, and I couldn't really be bothered to claim off Snowcard. The other accident was a bit more serious. I fell over and cut my leg open, blood everywhere, and chipped 3 bits of bone off my shoulder. And again, I went down to the hospital. They provided an X-ray there and then and ultrasound the following day on my shoulder to locate all the bits of bone. Very clean, very helpful, very friendly. Most impressed with French hospitals based on what I've seen. And I settled up using my debit card, again on presentation of this EHIC card, which I think is European Health Identity Card.
Right, and what about the actual insurance company then? Did you then present them with the receipt?
I haven't got around to doing that yet, but I'm confident that they'll pay out without any problem.
You mentioned the poles there for a second. You took carbon fibre poles. Now, how did they perform in the freezing cold?
Carbon is more comfortable. Well, first of all, they went all the way, 4,000 miles. I had some problems with them after 3,000 miles, and because I was clumsy again, I managed to snap one end piece, but I had an end piece in the car, so it wasn't really a problem. In the cold, they're fine. Much better, I think, than alloy poles, because you can actually grasp them without sort of leaving bits of your fingers behind when it's really cold. Carbon is nowhere near as cold as aluminium.
And they were Alpkit poles, weren't they?
Yes, they're Alpkit Carbon Light poles. The big plus with them turned out not to be the weight saving of Lakey's, but I forget my science, but a lighter weight pole will swing much more easily and more precisely than an aluminium pole. It's less like moving a sort of big heavy thing around. Consequently, you gain precision in placing the poles exactly where you want them.
Oh, right. Okay.
They did really, really well and strongly recommended.
You've turned into a scientist, Judy.
I don't know. But I mean, if old Muggins here who falls over every month or two can survive with poles, then I think with someone more gentle they'd do fine.
The problem, the question that probably most people would be curious to hear about would be footwear, because, you know, we were always talking about the lighter boots and so on.
Yeah.
Do tell us what footwear you took, how it lasted, and obviously your socks and your regime.
Yeah. It's the old footwear debate, isn't it? Do you go with cross trainers? Do you go with boots? Do you go with heavy boots? What do you do? In my particular case, I was planning to go solo for 10 months. And as you know, in the Alps, it can snow in summer, autumn, anytime. So all your gear really has to be suitable for four-season use, which means you either get very cold, wet feet in the snow, or you end up wearing something that'll keep you dry, I guess, and possibly sweat in the summer. It's a difficult call. I looked at quite a number of cross trainers, couldn't really find a pair that I could get on with that will give me the durability and wear that I wanted. I settled eventually on a pair of Aku Icaros, that's A-K-U Icaros. For me, they were superb. They handled all the weathers. They kept my feet dry in snow. The big plus of AccuRecaros is that they have something called an Air 8000 membrane. Don't just sort of turn off because you don't like Gore-Tex here. The thing to remember with Gore-Tex in boots is that it's not the membrane that makes a difference, it's how it's actually built. A lot of manufacturers will just put solid glue layers behind the Gore-Tex, and it really doesn't matter if it's Gore-Tex or what, then it's not going to breathe. Accu have a membrane which they call Air 8000, which is spot fixed, and that means that it breathes, they think, 7 times as well as ordinary Gore-Tex. Well, I don't know about the figures, but I wore these boots from -20 to +34 centigrade, and even in great heat like that, my socks were almost dry. So that's a technology to watch. I think Air 8000 has a great future, and I found the boots themselves very comfortable. I got about 1,000 miles per pair out of them.
I was going to say, how many pairs did you go through and socks?
I got through 4 pairs of Accu boots, wore out the soles in each one. I used 6 pairs of insoles for shock absorption, and I used 1,000 miles socks, and only used 2 pairs of those, even though I did 4,000 miles.
Well, I hope you're sending the other 2 pairs back for a refund then.
I think I better, hadn't I? Yeah. Yes.
Oh, well, and what was your regime as regards looking after yourself as regards, bathing your feet and keeping yourself clean and so on while you were out? Was it fairly easy in those conditions? And you just got used to the cold water, or did you sort of hold back and just let the smell grow and develop until you actually got back to base?
Well, rumour has it that high smell quotient is a good mosquito repellent. No, I don't think so. I always tend to run fairly cold. Well, that's to say I generate so much heat that I prefer, rather than sweating, to not wear a great deal of clothes. So it helps, I think, enormously if you don't sweat too much. It's one of the reasons why I wasn't really comfortable with Paramo as a solution, because to my mind I find Paramo just a bit too warm for me. I think it's superb technology, possibly for wet, damp conditions for England. It didn't work for me. I have the Paramo Velez. I just find it too hot. So the first thing to do is to try to get your temperature regulation right so you don't perspire too much. Beyond that, thinking fast here for something polite, I washed sometimes using snow. Snow is a great method of washing. I simply pop my clothes back on again afterwards and let my body heat dry me. The other technology I suppose I used was a Berghaus X static tee. This is a t-shirt, which I wore for much of the time, which has silver impregnated thread, and that prevents bacteria growing, and it jolly well works. There's a slightly disgusting quote on my site, which I suppose I better air now. Purely in the interest of science, I wore my T-shirt constantly, night and day, for 5 days, I think it was, and then wandered around the shop just to see whether they'd clear the shop. And nobody did anything in particular. Nobody looked at me, nobody looked disgusted, nobody walked away. So that's not bad, really.
Well, there's a thought. That's halved most blokes' washing, I should imagine, for a week.
Yes. In terms of spares, I'm just thinking, I don't think I took a single spare item of clothing. No, nothing at all. No,
well, you certainly got it honed down. Now, I know that many bloggers, outdoor bloggers, will be listening to this interview probably very, very closely because they were all following you and letting each other know what you were doing. And as you probably have picked up really in the last sort of few months, I would say that the online blogging as you go on any trip is really starting to take hold now. You took a certain amount of equipment with you. Could you just let us know what equipment you took, how it performed, and how you got on with batteries and charging and that sort of thing?
Yeah. Because this walk was for charity, I undertook to write quite comprehensive trip reports. I was fiddling around with a friend's BlackBerry, and this is a funny little tiny telephone thing with something that looks more or less like a tiny keyboard. I lasted about 10 seconds, enough, I think, to prove to myself that I couldn't work with a keyboard. It's probably okay if you just want to say something like, got to Chamonix, snowy here, well, love Judith or something. But I wanted to write more comprehensive things, so I used something called a sharp pocket mail. This for those who know phones, who know about mobile phones, in years back there used to be a long clamshell Nokia telephone that would open up along the side axis and give you a wide but not very tall screen and a proper QWERTY keypad. And it's like that, but it isn't actually a mobile phone. On the back it's got an acoustic coupler. So you use it like a little computer, and you can type in as much as you like. And when you're finished, you just go to any old telephone, clamp the phone on the back, and it makes fax noises. And you're buying not just the pocket mail, but also the service behind it that links up the telephone network with an email. So in effect, what you do is to connect it to the telephone, and it ends up as an email somewhere for somebody to pick up. That was superb. Very, very good indeed. Just runs off a couple of AA batteries, totally reliable. And you can do other things too, like it'll take a large address book. So if you want to keep in touch with people, you've got all their telephone numbers, their emails, and everything like that. Strongly recommended. Much used in America. And I think we should see more of it in Europe. Very good indeed.
So with the acoustic coupler then, just going to stop you there for a second, with the acoustic coupler, it would actually work with any phone?
It would. You could use it with a mobile if you have a deep pocket, because it's not particularly fast at transmitting things. More commonly, I just used it in payphones using a phone card bought in a local tobacconist. That's cheap, and you can get payphones anywhere, in Italy, in France, Switzerland.
Simple but effective.
Yeah. It's proven technology. It's a bit old hat. You look at it and you think, good grief, how old is this? But it works. That's the key thing.
Okay, and the dictaphone you took was a digital one, presumably?
I'm sorry?
The dictaphone you took was a digital one?
Yes, I'd experimented again. A lot of MP3 music players that you can buy nowadays have a, quote, voice recorder, quote, facility. I can't think who that's designed for, but the ones I've tried are all completely hopeless. They're really muffled and difficult to use. So I gave up on that and bought myself a proper professional dictaphone, an Olympus. Can't remember the model number, but it's absolutely tiny. It's about the size of 2 boxes of matches. The quality is crystal clear. You can record up to 256 megabytes, I think, which is enough for days and days of recording. It's even good enough if you want to record live music. We better not go there.
And now, you obviously took batteries. Did you take a solar charger as well?
Yes, I took a solar charger. I used an amorphous silicon cell array from Silicon Solar. I think the technology is good in that amorphous silicon will produce a higher charge current per area of cell. The other big advantage is that it's just about unbreakable, very thin and very light. The mistake I made was not bringing enough of the stuff. I forgot somewhere along the line that the sun only points from one direction, and that's usually not the direction that the solar cell is pointing in on your backpack. So if I used a solar cell again, I probably have 4 or 5 times the area.
And what did they charge? They plug into sort of a small box that holds a couple of AA batteries?
Yeah, as supplied, they just, you can plug AA or AAA batteries into it. With some bodger in a soldering iron, you can work out how to charge things like mobile phone batteries, which are 3.7 volts. So, yeah, they do work. And I think a little like Chris Townsend, I've come to curse the every single device you take on the hill has a different size battery. AAA, AA, bigger than that, OEM, commercial, telephone-size battery. So really I just gave up on the solar array eventually because it wasn't charging enough, and I just bought AA's.
Right. So you took a GPS logger as well, a simple GPS device as well. One thing I must ask you then, did you feel vulnerable at any time, possibly when you had some of these accidents, but did you feel vulnerable at all, either being a solitary female or sort of not having contact with people during the trip?
No, I can't think of a single time when I felt in the least bit vulnerable. No, never. In 2,500 hours of walking, no. Plenty of people were solicitous. A few people said get in the car, purely for my own safety. Yes. After the shoulder incident, when I broke off some bones in my shoulder. I thought, well, I'm not stopping for that. I still have 2 legs, and clamped my shoulder in a sling, chucked on the rucksack, and went walking. And of course, it's really rather sweet. Any Frenchman is naturally solicitous towards women, but when he meets a single woman on a hill wearing a sling, he virtually gets down on his knees and says, "What can I do to help you?" So I was walking high up in the mountains with a sling through a tunnel which was cut underneath the top of a mountain. Fortunately, it was a head torch. And as luck would have it, I met a hunter in a 4x4 coming through in his big truck through the middle of the tunnel. So I sort of flashed my light at him, and he stopped. Then he looked at me, and he said, "Get in French." So I said, no, I'm fine, really. I'm going for a walk. At this point, he probably had me dialed in as an Englishwoman. He said, "You're mad." I said, "Probably, but I'm still going for a walk, but thank you for your offer." So I guess I've left a bit of a reputation up there.
You've had more offers in French on the mountains in France than in the streets of London.
Yeah, I don't find that, well, maybe it's just me. I mean, I'm 6 foot tall, luckily, but I've never felt frightened of other people in the mountains. And on the occasions when I've fallen over, I've never lost consciousness. So far, I've always had legs to walk out on. So you just get going. It takes longer.
Oh, fair play to you. Excellent. So, you've achieved your goal, or a version of it, as you initially set out to do. And I know you've got another one sort of bubbling under at the moment, which we'll come back and talk to you about some other time, if we may. So I must congratulate you on that, and it's been a great achievement. I look forward to seeing all the various stories and things that come from you in the website and so on. I certainly recommend people go and visit your website and spend several hours dreaming of some of the things they can do. But what would you say, what has been the single biggest memory that has left you with the actual trip, the single biggest either discovery about yourself or the area, or something you just hadn't realised would dawn on you and make such a big impact?
One thing I've come to realise is that trying to think how to put it, I hadn't realised over all this walking how much it's changed me, and I've never actually been very self-confident, oddly enough. It may sound a bit perverse. But I am actually, I think, more comfortable in the mountains than out of the mountains now. I'm not really worried when there's storms or thunder or whatever. Fine. I know about it. I know what to do. Sounds awfully like bragging, doesn't it? It's just comfort and confidence, I think, that has been produced. And it's quite strange now. I'm in London. I feel rather like a child looking in through a lighted window at everybody else doing something else. So it's a bit weird, really.
No, well, that was going to be one of my sort of last questions, really, was you sold up everything to go and do this trip. You spent most of the year doing it. You've come back to London, presumably, to top the funds up before the next one.
That's it.
It must be very much being like a bit of an interloper at the moment, just as you say, visiting the shop, knowing that you're going to be going out through the door again shortly.
Yes, exactly. It's exactly like that. My personality seems to be bowling me funnies. I thought that I'd come back to London and loathe it, all the grey, all the dirt, all the things. I sure don't mind at all. It's just like something which doesn't relate to me at all. It's not part of my life. It's something I'm just looking at from the outside. Years ago, when I ran semi-professionally, to keep costs down, we used to invite each other, foreign athletes, to come and stay. And I had a Nigerian athlete who came to stay with me. And she looked around sort of wide-eyed, and I thought, yes, this is all completely alien to you. And I feel like that now. Quite strange.
Well, here's a bit of a lowball for you then, Judy. Of all the questions I could have asked you about this trip, which one should I have asked you?
Would I do it again? And the answer is definitely yes, definitely. And I think if anybody has dreams and hopes, it's time to say, okay, let's make this happen. Even if it doesn't happen the way you expect it to, you'll come back a richer person. I've had, I think, one of the most special years of my life, been full of so many amazing experiences. And possibly now I've come back to London, I'm just beginning to realise the beneficial effects it's had on me.
Well, you're an inspiration, Judy, and all I can say is thank you very much indeed for allowing me to talk to you before this event as well as after. It's been you're an inspiration to me and certainly to many listeners, I'm sure, and they'll be fascinated to hear your story, and wish you all the best for the plans for the next trip. So, please, will you talk to me again and tell me about your next trip when the time comes?
Bob, with great pleasure. It's always a pleasure talking with you. I'd love to.
My thanks to Judy for sharing the experience with us. There was so much to talk about that we didn't even get round to mentioning her sponsors, who include Aku, Alpkit, BackpackingLight.co.uk, Gossamer Gear, Montaigne, Northern Lights, Nanotech, Trail Designs and Windwards. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast, and perhaps I could ask you to celebrate her achievement by visiting her website alpinechallenge.info and contributing something towards Judy's sponsorship efforts for cancer research. I will warn you, however, that you might be on there for hours, as she has written an extensive and detailed diary, reviewed all of her equipment, explained the planning and added route comments, all of which is incredibly interesting and goes into great detail. It's also great to hear that lightweight gear is, of course, up to the job too, as she survives some quite harsh conditions at times. It would also appear that mainland Europe is still lagging behind on that front, so before you head out and go Via Alpina, make sure you get your lightweight gear sorted here first. So, until next time folks, take care, happy route planning, and remember,
Minimum weight.
maximum fun.
This sponsored programme has been brought to you by theoutdoorstation.co.uk.